This is The Audience Connection, the podcast where we go beyond what connects and into why it actually sticks.
Episodes are grounded in both research and real-world experience, unpacking what's behind audience behavior, from psychology and neuroscience to cultural cues and decision-making.
And then we ground all those principles into real-world applications, so you understand exactly how to create stories that are memorable and change behavior.
We talk to brand storytellers, behavior scientists, and communication leaders about the real drivers of attention, trust, and action.
Sponsored by Casual, where behavioral science meets storytelling to build trust for your audiences.
We're your hosts, Ollie Atkinson and Lydia Chan. Welcome back to the Audience Connection, guys. Today, we're letting the audience choose their own journey. Not you guys listening specifically. You'll have to listen all the way through like usual. But yeah, today's guest is someone who has spent her career exploring a really fundamental question. What if audiences didn't just watch stories, but actively participated in them?
Yeah, now we've worked in interactive docs ourselves, and we've produced interactive work. I've worked in interactive theatre, so this is a real subject that I really passionate about, actually. You know, you've got interactive games as well. It sort of spreads out into all areas of society, but Sandra has spent much of her career, you know, studying this, and she's really a pioneer of interactive documentary and immersive storytelling, and exploring how digital media can transform audiences from passive viewers into active participants. And so her work, it really argues that stories don't just inform people, they actually shape how we understand the world and how we actually relate to each other. So when audiences are able to interact with a story or explore it or even contribute to it, that changes the relationship entirely.
Right, because we all have our own perceived reality, right? And that's all shaped by our own experiences, how we grew up, our language, our culture, and traditional storytelling tends to guide audiences down a single path, which is through the lens of, you know, the people making the story. And we know with true audience connection, if you're actually interacting with something, that lodges into memory more deeply, and it resonates a bit more long term. Yeah,
and this is packed with case studies, so fascinating case studies. And Sandra asked, what happens when you open that up, right? So when audiences can explore, contribute, or even help shape a narrative, what happens then? And we also dive into impact storytelling, so not just about telling a powerful story, but thinking about how stories then ripple out into the world and how that influences conversations, communities, and even social change.
Well, a great conversation about how storytelling is evolving. So here's Ollie's conversation with Sandra Gaudenzi.
Sandra, welcome to the Audience Connection podcast. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on. And I'm really excited to talk about interactivity, how that plays out, and some impact storytelling as well. I'd love to dive in straight away by talking to you a little bit around your journey into this field. And there was one specific bit from the research that you sent to me on your Medium article around a speck of dust on your eye. And I'd love to kind of recap on that and some of the references in there, because I thought that was a really lovely introduction into how you started thinking differently about the way you could produce a doc.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for having me to start with. I think when we look back to our choices in life and why, for me, interactivity ended up being something really important, we construct stories of where it comes from. So I have several ones. I think in the article that you referred to, there are two parallel stories. One is effectively like a physical moment where I remember being really small. I don't know the age. I would imagine 9. I don't know, actually, because I only see it from the inside. And I really remember effectively touching at the fact that our body perceives the world in a way that it can, but it doesn't mean that the world is like that. And the way it happened to me, it was literally having a bit of dust going through my eye and realizing that I was seeing the world with this blob. And it looked like if the world had a blob. But then by just cleaning my eye, the world was clean again. And so it made me realize the end of my body, the beginning of the world as I see, and questioning, oh, how does my head put all this together into creating what effectively is what I believe is a reality? And so I think, of course, at that age, I didn't have a philosophical explanation about constructivism and phenomenology. All that was like not existent to me. But it kind of planted that doubt that things were maybe not as easy, as simple as grown-ups were putting it. So I think that's part of my beginning or in my embodied journey into the idea of reality being complex, being layered, being embodied, and the relationship between the mind and our perception, and how storytelling actually bridges all those different bits that, if not, would be disconnected. So that's one part of why I think storytelling is fascinating. And I think the other story that is also, I believe, in that article is more related to my upbringing. I'm half French, half Italian, and I grew up in a bilingual family. So we would be eating the evening, and I would literally speak in French to my mom and then turn and continue the sentence in Italian to my father. Now, being bilingual and then having to move in other countries and having to learn other languages, okay, as such is a skill. But I think what it does in your brain is that it makes you realize that, I think this is the example in the article, a glass is a glass in English, it's a bicchiere in Italian, it's a verre in French. And when you're really small, those three things, those three sounds are three different things. Because it takes you time to understand that actually we have different words, languages to speak about the same thing. And so again, this is another way of feeling, not even thinking about it, but feeling that everything that we give a meaning to, that meaning is a cultural construct. It's a language construct, which is about language. It's maybe a cultural construct when I have to even discuss what a glass does. There might be culture where the glass doesn't exist or do other things. So this idea that everything is dependent and situated into a very complex system, which is a little bit physical, a little bit cultural, a little bit about how our brain works, a little bit about values and societal values and nature. And it's like if our way through life is a constant storytelling to make sense of way too many things to which we need to give some sort of meaning just to be able to be together and even to speak to each other. And this is absolutely fine. The fact that we will never grasp the entirety of our possibilities is okay. That's our living condition. But I think what fascinated me was this feeling of, okay, but at least we need to be aware of that. So if I'm aware that I'm speaking to you in English, and through my language what comes to you is something that you probably understand, hopefully, even if I have an accent, but that will be only part of what I'm trying to say, and it's okay. And yet, I could probably speak differently as well. And so this idea that possibilities are always around us, and that our job as human beings is to, in one way, do the best of those possibilities, but also be humble enough not to believe that we are right, because I'm speaking English and I'm saying this is a glass, and that's it. Well, not really. We can agree that this is what we're going to use as a way to be together now, but let's also agree that there are other possibilities. And that, for me, is also, right now in this moment, a really urgent call to understand diversity, complexity, different cultures, and not, as something positive and fundamental human, as opposed to be in a sort of dichotomy, which is good, bad, body, brain, all those dualisms that we carry through our culture. I think we need to take them with a pinch of salt, because they are becoming extremely dangerous right now. And so I think being aware of these is the first step. And storytelling is a way of doing that.
And did you worked in documentaries and in storytelling for a long time prior to going more into this iDocs field?
Yes. So I think my love for storytelling, led me to television production. And I loved it to bits, actually. I did nearly 10 years of television production on the factual side of things, short documentaries. What I keep from there is, and those years, is this beauty to be able to encounter people, interview them, connect in the middle, as we're doing right now. Suddenly opening your mind to the universe of someone else. So those, all these aspects of storytelling each other as a way to get in contact with a whole other world, a whole other way of living your life, a whole other set of values, interests, whatever. So I think that's the magic of that job. And then I had to go in an edit suite and spend very long hours to put all these humongous amount of beautiful things into a single story. And for me, that was agony. And I don't think I knew then that the reason I was really agonizing was precisely because it felt like a reduction of reality to just say, well, this is what I've seen, people I spoke to. I spoke with them for 3 hours, but I ended up using only 20-second grabs because those were the ones that fitted into the narrative arc that I had to create. So I started being aware that what we call a narrative arc, what we want to see in TV, the type of narratives that we're used to, which is introduction, complication, a little bit of excitement, and then conclusion, is a construct. And I had to put all the things I was discovering in this construction that actually was very pale in regard to reality. And it's interesting because when I was, 25 years old at that stage, I just could feel the pain. That's all I was in contact with. I thought, I don't know how to do this. I don't want to have a final line, which is banal, like, thank you so much, or whatever. It's like, this is not what it was like. So I was only in contact with the pain. And it's only around the year 2000 when computers started arriving into the television as an institution. So we started using computers to write script, but lately also to edit. And then the web, which we think is part of the air that we breathe, but actually it's only about 26-year-old pretty much. I mean, at least as something that we use.
Yeah, it's early days really, isn't it?
25 years is nothing. If you think about the history of cinema, it took them 50 years to just put the sound. So imagine what 25 years is like. And I remember when we started editing with computers where, again, the process, the media forces you to do things differently. So you don't need to go through all the tape. You can start to have different layers because you can see them on your computer. The software shapes the way you see and what you can do. Media have their affordances. They allow you to do certain things and they don't allow you to do others. And I had the click at that moment where I could see, oh, I'm editing differently. And online, that was the beginning of websites. I can go in a place, click there, go somewhere else. And that started to be for me a language and a media that allowed for a larger way of speaking of reality. And so I actually left my job pretty much. I was 30 years old, left my job and thought, okay, I'm going to do an MA in what was then called multimedia. Because I thought, I want to do documentary, I want to speak about the world, about what is important, but I want to do it in such a way that people have an agency within it, that they're not just listening to me and believing me. Because what I have to say is like, I'm speaking about the glass. But if you come from another world, that maybe is not what you need to know. So this idea of giving back a form of freedom and agency to an audience and to be together in the story as opposed to just be the controller of the story and putting my audience into an observer of my glance felt super exciting. And that's how I moved into the idea of what I then called interactive documentary, because that's what I was interested in. to discover, unfortunately, by the end of the MA, that there were no jobs because the potential was there, but the industry was not. And this is how I moved into academia, and basically because I kept studying the potential of the media, of the digital media, as opposed to making and producing, because it never felt that it was really exactly at the point that was interesting.
Yeah, and it's something I've seen really, like from my university days. I did I think we spoke on our discovery call. I did interdisciplinary performance, which had all those different elements, multimedia, all site-specific performance, all of that. And the course got shut down. And then even in from working on interactive content, casual and in various other places, like it doesn't get adopted as easily as you might hope.
Yeah.
And it's always seen as a layer of cost, or there's always an excuse not to do it. I find clients often sort of shy away from it, and that for me is quite. I always want to explore it because I think it's really interesting, and like almost like I did some interactive theatre, but doing theatre in the round but inverted. So you've kind of got these open possibilities around your production.
But immersive experiences are all around at the moment. So it doesn't come as quickly as we think, and often it doesn't arrive in the way we think. But I would say that at the moment, location-based entertainment, LBE, immersive experiences are suddenly a business proposition. And it took, I don't know, nearly 30 years.
And a pandemic.
And a pandemic for people to want to be back together. But it also took, and I think we only see it retrospectively when we look back, it also took a lot of experimentation from theater companies, Blast Theory, for example, who's done a lot of work, which was in between. They were coming from theater, but ended up doing lots of things with digital media. Punch Drunk have experimented for a very long time, and I think what they learn through time then gets sort of feeds into other spaces. So somehow I think when you are leaving, you feel that things are slow because they're slower than what you would want to. But then it's a bit like planting seeds, and you never really know which one are the seeds who are going to actually really grow. But eventually, somewhere, things start growing. And maybe it just takes more time than what we think.
Yeah, because if you go back to the kind of very early days of storytelling, everyone around a fire, like everybody's interacting, communicating, telling each other but you're right, we've ended up in this society where it's very top down in terms of how we communicate. So it'd be good to kind of explore that further. I'd love to talk around the different levels. So you've categorized it, right, in terms of the levels of interactivity.
I need to maybe have a little bit of an introduction to that, because I live in academia, but I also have this way of coming in and out of it because of the way my brain probably works. So I was doing a PhD, that's probably 15 years ago, and if not a bit more, and I was fascinated into seeing the very early days of interactivity in documentary or in factual narrative online, mainly a little bit in gaming. And so, you put your hat as an academic and you think, right, I need to understand the field. So I need to check what is around. And once I've checked that there was a little bit of stuff on the web, some things which were just on your computer where you could click and just use hypertext as we do on any web page. We just don't call them hypertext anymore. It's the blue stuff that you click and moves you somewhere else. But a lot of people did write of hypertext around the year 2000 because it was a novelty. And so I think with an academic brain, you have to classify. That's what you do. So I thought, how do I make sense? And I think classifying is always problematic because by definition, first you're imposing your own way of thinking because you only classify following your own logic. And secondly, it becomes obsolete very quickly, especially in technology. So I think when I think of the way I classified, which I'm going to go into in a second, what I would retain is the intention and probably not the result, because I think the result is already obsolete. So let me explain this a little bit better. I thought, how do I classify, how do I make sense of all the ways we could tell stories, which are factual stories, very large idea of what documentary is. So I see documentary as documenting the world and not documentary as, only the film form. So that's already, taking a little bit of liberty.
Yeah.
Which has been problematic sometimes, but anyway. And then I thought, what is different in digital? What is the fundamental things that we didn't have before? Because in the digital media, we can use video, we can use audio, we can sometimes have a bit of tactile, rather now than in the year 2000, etc. So in a way, it is multisensory and it's multimodal, so you can put it all together. But really, we could have done that in doing a video installation before, where, we would have a projection on a screen and then a little bit of smell somewhere. And, so it's not that is much easier with the digital media, but it's not unique. I think the bit that is unique is this idea of interacting with the story. And this is setting it aside from what you were referring to, that if we're all on a group of people and we're doing oral storytelling, we keep interrupting each other in the way we are interacting with each other, of course. But we're doing it in real life. We're not doing it into a media story. So the moment the story has to sit in some form of media, whether that is a book, whether that is TV, whether that is radio, then it becomes kind of trapped into the form that the media can allow you to do. And in that sense, if you move from all these media which are linear, a book, you can only go through flickering the pages from the beginning till the end. TV or video, you watch it from you can stop it, of course, but it's meant to be seen as a linear story. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly arrives the computer, and then the web, and then the phone, the mobile phone, and the iPad, and we skip through stuff. So we interact with the content. And so suddenly I thought, this is the bit, the relationship that we have with what it means to interact with the story is the bit that is completely new. So how do I classify that? Because clicking and moving to the next part of my web page I called it a hypertext mode. I'm using a logic of interaction, which is I click somewhere to go somewhere else, but that somewhere else has been preset for me by the author. Someone has put that content on a web page or, on an interactive documentary or whatever. So that is a logic from the author point of view. You have a series of points where you want your audience to go, and you also organize how they can get there. So I call that the hypertext.
So it's kind of like a branching structure.
Branching structures are a classic of that. You could do it without only branching. You could have a main story. That's what a lot of people do. Like there's a main story, and then every so often, if you have a look to how we read the news, we have a main story. That's our text. Each hypertext allows you to see the video, click, hear the audio. But then you come back and you continue to read the rest, you scroll your article. So that is like, if you had to do a little picture of it, it's like a straight line with lots of little...
Having a look at little siloed areas and coming back. Yeah.
You're moving around and you go, oops, I want to peek at that. So you give a little bit of space to curiosity, but as an author, you still retain the beginning, the middle, and the end. You just give a bit of sightseeing to your audience. So that's an option of interactivity, a little bit restricted because you keep control of your story, but it's an option. And the other option that was already very present since the beginning was more the option of video games, which already existed because gaming and computers have been around. And they were very much relating on this idea of interaction. But often a game is a 3D space where with the mouse or now in VR with your physique, you can move, but regardless of what is it that moves. But the idea is that you turn around and the world turns around you and gives you the option of opening the door or finding the clue. So that form of interaction feels to the user much more like you are going into a journey where you have the computer is reacting to you. It's more like a conversation between you and a space that you can now discover. So I've called that conversational But effectively, most games work like that. Most of the 3D games and a lot of virtual reality stories work like that.
So is that a sandbox then? Is that what that type of game you would call a sandbox? You've got an environment and you are going around and meeting characters in that environment.
Yes,
is that right?
In the sandbox, you normally also have the algorithm also creates new stuff. It's a bit more generative. So I think that is yet another level of interactivity. Because there's a difference between moving through your flat, because effectively moving through a video game is the same as moving in real life in your flat. And, what I see is what is there. It has been planted by someone, by the owner of the flat. And that would be different than in a lot of generative games. The story, the algorithm actually creates artifacts as we go. Right. So that is a level of interactivity which I have classified like higher. Like the author doesn't have full control. It's like a flat that kept having people moving things around and new lamps all the time, depending on how
my decisions,
how your decisions. Yeah. So that for me is like, a higher level of interactivity because, you author lose the control of, you set the rules. Like if you think of a game like The Sims, there are games that have used the same tricks, like Everything done by O'Reilly, where you move through the history of the world and you start, you're not even a cell, and then you meet other cells and you mate. So you create, a bit like the Pokemons, you create a new entity that was probably never designed by the author, but the author designed the rules in such a way that if a microorganism meets something else, can't remember the name of all those little things, boom, it becomes a cell that it now has a name and has a certain behavior in the world. And then this thing can move. And basically going through this very, very, very long game, Everything, you go from very small scale of being to the universe. And there isn't a real script. And the thing that I will see when I play it are going to be different from yours because we're not going to make same choices. And the algorithm also creates physical entities that I see and you don't see. So the content is not predicted, but the rules is what the author will be sort of responsible for. And so that's the second type of interactivity. And then there's a third type, which I called participatory, where I thought, well, the other thing that is really happening online now, even more with social media, but when I was doing, that's why it's already a bit obsolete, this classification, we're less on our mobile phones, is that we, if we're on social media, you and me can actually create a story by collaborating. So this is a form of interactive storytelling. I mean, and if we're speaking about things that are factual, this maybe is a form of documentary. It's like a sort of, and yet it's completely different than click here and go there. We are using the medium within a space that might be social media, but you could also create a space as an author for people to interact. For example, a project like Question Bridge, which was quite early on, was a project where the topic, it was a question. It wasn't a project. The question was, what does it mean to be a black man today in America? And we're speaking about at least 10 years ago. So it's a question. The project is a question. But the interface online, and it was also an exhibition, was a space where if you were a black man, you could come and ask your question. How do you know when you're a man, for example, is the first question that I think I saw in that project. And anybody else that sees that question and is black and men, because it's for that target audience, can record and give an answer. So now this becomes a space of conversation, but it's completely participatory in the sense that the author has zero control. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of moderation, of course, but what I mean is the only thing that the author was in control of was the intention. I want to create a space to speak about blackness in the US and maybe about masculinity as well. I also want to, I'm going to do an installation. Sometimes they did it in supermarkets as well, so that it could be more open to a diverse audience. And it will sit also on the web. So you control the media, the intention.
The moderation.
a bit of moderation.
When does that line get? You have to be quite careful, surely, if you're trying to kind of create this open environment and not steer the narrative in any way. You need to sort of set it up and leave it alone, right? Like,
to a certain level, there is also the fact that you might be filtrating a little bit the content that you think is more interesting, to make your project more appealing. But overall, the intention is to create a space of discussion. It's not, I'm going to tell my story. It's not, I think I'm going to do a documentary about Blackness and, and I'm going to interview the people I think are interesting. And then I'm going to create a story that starts like this and finishes like this. It's like, no. But the reason for which those ways of using interactivity are for me interesting is not, it's of course they help us to give a name to different type of interactive storytellings that are around. But more than anything is because they respond to, I think, an ethic of storytelling. If the type of person ends up doing and creating participatory stories, online or not online, are people who believe that the story doesn't belong to them, that their role is to foster dialogue, that their role is to give a voice to people who normally don't have a voice, for example. So in that case, if that's your intention, then I think an interactive participatory storytelling logic is ideal, probably much better than a straight linear documentary. If, on the other hand, let's go to the last, there was a fourth level of mode of interactivity, which I called experiential, which I think now is a little bit obsolete. And this is because 15 years ago, VR wasn't, well, more than 15 years ago, nearly 20 years ago, VR was not really around, at least at a consumer level. Of course, VR has a very long history, actually, but not as a consumer product because it was too expensive to have the headsets. So what we did have 15 years ago was the beginning of, for example, we had mobile phones. And so people started doing stories that were geolocated. So, for example, I could go in the streets and just using audio, but my mobile phone would know where I was. And so I could, for example, plant oral stories in a space. I give you an example, Blast Theory that I quoted before, which I think were, a fantastic group. They are UK-based, by the way. Did a project called Rider's Walk, and the idea is that you were a cyclist. They would give you a bicycle and a mobile phone. And the mobile phone, with a very rudimentary sort of interface then, because it's an old project. I think it started in 2007. So
yeah,
and it would give you just the interface had a voice. You would switch it on, and the voice would say, "Welcome to Rider's Walk." And then I think the first question was something like, "Well, we're going to stay together for a good hour. So why don't you find yourself a place in London you really like? And when you get there, stop there and come back to me." So that's a prompt. But what does it do to you? And this, I called it experiential because this is about using the city as an interface. We're not in a computer game. I'm literally cycling. I'm literally not only cycling with my body, but with my head, I'm thinking, oh, I'm at the Barbican. What is the nearest place that I really like? So I now have an active need to find a place. And I think I stopped at St. Bartholomew's Church or Square that is not too far. And now suddenly you stop and you go back to your interface and the voice says something like, "Oh, amazing, you found a place. Tell me why you chose it." So now I am taking my phone to record my explanation of why I stopped here. And I'm planting my story of why this place means something to me. So I'm planting it, no one can see it, but if someone else comes into that area within Rider's Walk and with that interface, they will be able to listen to me.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I'm creating now, I'm part of a cloud of stories about the city that other people can now interact with. But what I thought was even more intelligent in that project is as I'm now explaining why I chose this place, I realized that I don't know because, there are places you like, you feel okay there. So you go there and then suddenly someone asks you, why did you choose it? And you go, oh, you're right. Let me have a look. what is it here that I really like? And by doing this, you move into another level of, you remember I was saying at the beginning, I'm very, I'm passionate about understanding how we make sense of the world. So now I'm asked to make sense of my choices. And so you tell your stories. And now that I've told my story, I can't remember what I said. It was a very long time ago. But now that I finished recording, so the story is my story being planted into a cloud of stories. And now the interface tell me, thank you for your generosity. Would you want to listen to other stories, other people who have chosen the same place? And so I would probably have never wasted my time to listen to someone telling me why they like that place, but because I have chosen it and because I've just made the effort to understand what drew me here, I'm now actually completely fascinated in knowing why someone that I've never met in my life has recorded a story about maybe growing up there or having a grandmother living there. And so this type of storytelling, which I called experiential, it's about using interactivity, I think, at its larger and widest form, and also probably the most akin to us being human beings, where the interactivity is led through a story and a device that will prompt me, allow me to record, to listen. But really, I'm interacting and in relationship and connection with A, the environment, which is already, I think, incredible. Two, my way, it's an introspective way of thinking, how do I relate to this environment? So to my way of understanding the environment. And three, to other people, to understanding that this environment is different for others. And so you can see how all those things put together does relate to my earlier story about the 3 glasses.
Yes, yeah.
Because it's the same thing, but just by using storytelling and a medium, which in this case was just a mobile phone. So locative storytelling now exists as a word. It didn't really exist then. So no one speaks about experiential storytelling because that was the invention of a PhD. But now, a few years later, you hear definitions like we have moved from storytelling to story living, which is kind of similar. This idea that if the interface is the space or a VR space, for example, and your body is moving through it and you are a character of a story, then you're living the story as opposed to listening to it. Some people speak about story doing, which is, and if on top of that I do something during the story, then I also am an active character. So what is my doing? So I think we can find 1,000 words to speak and define things, and to a certain level, they're not very important. But the format and the medium itself imposes on you, even if you have the best intentions, imposes on you limitations. And in a story that has to be linear, that those limitations do not allow you to give a real role and to your audience effectively. Apart from, and this doesn't mean that I don't like films or documentary. I spend a lot of my time looking at them. So I know what the pleasure is to be led by someone into a story. I'm not saying that it's not, but I just think that that there is more, that we should explore also other options. It's not either or, and there is more.
So the reason I really love that what's the locative storytelling? What's it called? Yes, because and from my kind of pop psychology understanding is that what that's doing is connecting subconscious and conscious as you're going through the story. Completely. So it's taking you somewhere, and then all of a sudden you're having to post-rationalize and say, why am I here? I think that's really powerful. And I think, the point around being led is obviously you're a deep thinker around this topic, and you want to go into different areas, and you have this sort of expansive view. Do you think that, because I wonder whether people like being led because of the low effort, and what we have at the moment is people are sort of disengaging even from story, where they're sort of double screening, they're not really engaging with things properly at all, but it's still going in some form or another. How do we turn people more into, how do we enthuse people to do more of this sort of participatory viewing?
I think it depends who are the people and what type of stories we're talking about. if you think about how social media is ever present, that's already your answer, that people want to be involved. The problem is, what are they involved with? So I think a lot of people spend a fair amount of their day posting, reacting. So that need of not just being led, in theory, is there. It's just that it's used within an environment which I think is leading people towards, sort of content bubble and towards, creating, it could, what I'm trying to say is that social media could be used differently, could be used to open up to others, has been used to help in creating communities. So it's not that it's good or bad, but that because the intention of the corporate which are behind them is to actually trap you into a sort of scrolling, then it sort of doesn't really, you think you're interacting, but you're not doing much more than I like, I don't like, next, et cetera, providing data.
Yeah.
So you're becoming a machine without an algorithm that is effectively, using you. But this is not because the medium as such is bad. It's because it has been used to create a huge profit for very few companies. And, if we wanted as a nation, if we wanted as people, if we were to wake up, we could probably, reclaim part of the agency to do the stuff that we really want to do. Maybe to be more in contact with our neighbors, maybe to do things together, maybe to, I don't know, have a reflexive life. I don't know. I think there is the human brain and the human nature is very complex. And of course, it's quite easy to tap into our addictive side. So, and the fact that this is how it's used is not the proof that the medium as such is, good or bad. A medium is a tool. A tool is a tool. We do what we want with it, and it's the same for the media. And also, so this, sorry, it's a long answer to say, I think actually people do want to be part of and be active. It's just that they are misled into how they can be active. So that's first part of the... But then the other thing is, I have, young adult kids, and they never, ever switch on television. They might go into Netflix and watch series, and they do go to the cinema, but they are much more into, they need to feel that they have control on choosing something on YouTube, playing a game, etc. So I think this need of not just being led has already moved a lot. My generation compared to them is like, there's a huge difference. The problem is that the space in which that interaction is possible, I think, is overall toxic. Not always. This is why I'm teaching, because I really hope to wake up my students to say, guys, the tool is here. Use it for something useful. Take control. Move with it. Don't be, sort of absorbed by it. So I think our job right now is to understand, to be aware of also of the beauty of the possibility and of the positive side of the story, as opposed to, only be the victim of the negative side of what is happening in interactive media.
Yeah. I think that's when you actually experience a really positive interactive piece, that it raises awareness, or it can be really powerful in that sense. It would be good at this point to kind of talk about a few of the case studies that you've worked on. You've referred to a few projects there. One I wanted to talk about, and unfortunately can't see it anymore, but Alma, this one about domestic violence, and the fact that you could scroll between her face as she's telling the story. So it was direct to the lens, wasn't it? The shot, and she's talking, but then you scroll down to see the B-roll.
So Alma was a project done by Upion, a French company who, I would say 15 years ago, were really the leaders. I mean, France has always given quite a lot of money for any type of storytelling, including the digital one. So I would say that France was, and still is, now more in VR, quite leading in Europe with a few other countries which are sustaining culture in a way. And so Alma was bizarrely still, I think, a linear story, because it was a long interview with, if I remember well, a woman from Guatemala who had been part of a gang. And it was a long interview. So one interview, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes, of one person speaking of her life. And there I remember that Alexandre Brachet, who was the guy behind Upion and still is, was telling me the interview was so powerful because she goes through the most incredible atrocities of gang culture and how you're led to kill people and it becomes normal because if not, you don't survive. And I mean, things that you stay and you listen.
It's quite arresting, yeah.
It was like, whoa, very powerful. So there was no point in using interactivity to move out of the story. You know, cognitively, you would just only want to know what happened next. So the way they had decided to use the beginning of interactivity was not to interact with the story by clicking and going somewhere else, but to interact with the video. This was a web piece, and you could actually also done for the iPad. That was mainly because the iPad was a novelty then, and so you had this face speaking to you, and you could listen to you. And what the idea was, interactivity doesn't need to be just about content. It can just be, how do I watch? How do I show my presence in this story? So in this case, the idea is you could either watch her speaking to you, or sometimes the stories were really so hard to listen to that, your natural inkling would have been to sort of move out, not look. And the equivalent of that was to move with your finger, and then you would see a second sort of video stream. So the audio stream was the same, but you could decide whether you're watching her or you were watching an animation of things she was talking about, so that it was more bearable. And I think there are not that many pieces who are doing this right now, I think. It was an interesting experimentation because it was about understanding that, again, this idea of how do I show up in a story can be very subtle. There, it was very subtle. Another piece, which I think was called A Place on Hold, something like that, was a piece where, for example, you would listen again to women who had been raped during a war. Again, very strong story. But in order to listen to their stories, you had to press, this is all computer stuff because it's 10 years ago at least, you had to press the space bar. And at the beginning, that's very annoying. It's very annoying to have to press space to listen to something. And then after a while, you understand that this movement is a way of showing into the story because you have to make the effort to hold the space. And the piece is called The Space We Hold, and you hold the space shift down in order to listen to someone who has not been listened to for I don't know how many years because of the war history of her country. And so I think, I don't know if those are winning strategies, how many of us really want to do these, but for sure they are important because they were an experimentation on how do we interact maybe with a mouse, maybe with our body, maybe with our silence, sometimes by speaking. For example, a piece that was called My Mother's Lingo, which was very beautiful Aboriginal piece from Australia, was about a disappearing language. And it was a straight story with animation, very beautiful, about a girl saying that her grandmother used to speak to her with this language and that now we don't have it anymore. And so every so often she would say a key word in that language. And what you had to do to continue the story was to repeat that word. So in order to know the story of a language that disappears, you need to be part of the pattern of speaking that language and making the effort to hear it, because a language is only alive
if you keep speaking
it. So I think those were symbolic ways of using, I would say,
what I like about that, though, is that it's quite an easy ramp on to doing something interactive, right? Like, you know, there's this sort of like step towards how do you get to this, and like curating a project, I guess that's fairly easy to sort of set that up as well, isn't it? If you want to go to that further level.
It's probably not the most mainstream things to do, but I think it's quite. I think maybe with VR pieces or XR VR, extended reality, this is now becoming even easier because you can easily do something where, you're in a world, and because there is a microphone anyway, you can speak. And
so just to clarify, VR, obviously virtual reality, extended reality, that's a mix of AR and VR, or is that, what do you mean by extended reality?
Right. So, if that's why the world of definitions is a touch business. And I tend to try to be quite agnostic, but effectively, my way of explaining this is that we had VR, which was virtual reality, needed headsets. Even in VR, you have two big families. One is a cinematic look, which is a 360 VR. So those are cameras who are recording 360. So when you look at it, it looks like the real world. It looks like a film all around you, but it's a form of VR. And then you have CGI, so computer-generated sort of imagery. So this is the VR that looks more like a computer game, and then a few hybrid in between. So you're moving into a space that clearly is not recorded by a camera, let's say. And then there is an in-between, but let's move on. So we had VR, and then on the side of that, there was another thing that was augmented reality, which was more, I can see through, those were headsets, I can see through the headsets the world as it is, but there is a layer, so you can add one layer, but I still see through. So I extend, I overimpose, if you want, an image on what I see. And that didn't pick up because no one really wanted to buy the headset, although it's coming back now because we're speaking of mixed reality, which effectively is this. Now we have mixed reality headset that allow you to, through a camera, see the world, and then it can also switch off and become all VR. Right. So now this difference between AR and VR is a bit merging into this mixed reality. But the thing is, technology goes super fast. So we finish one word definition, and we're already into the next one. And AR, augmented reality, also ended up being something that you can do on your phone. Even just if you think about using the filters on social media, and
then Pokemon Go was a huge hit, wasn't it?
Pokemon Go
got everyone
was
out
doing
into
that.
The streets.
Absolutely. So what started to happen is that you had all those technology which were somehow immersive, but were using different headsets, different medium, and then we started speaking about doing immersive exhibitions, where so physical space but merging a bit of maybe sound, and then sometimes you have sort of 360 images, but they're on the wall. You don't need to have them on your headsets, which are the Van Gogh exhibition, all those which are now called location-based entertainment. So this became a family that was like pretty much immersive technologies, was using images technologies, but the results were completely different from one to the other. And so that's how this wording of expanded reality emerged as a way to put all together. But the problem with these is that it therefore it doesn't really mean very much.
It's a catch-all, isn't it? Yeah.
Because so some people speak about immersive technologies, other about immersive storytelling, other about immersive experiences, other speak about extended realities. It's going to change in a couple of years anyway, so let's not get too attached to that. But what it means is that clearly there is now a trend or a need to move out of the flat screen and to have longer experiences where, for example, they're called experiences. They're not called stories. Yeah. They're called experiences because I think we have a need to have our bodies involved again. So there is the key words at the moment are very much embodiment, embodied storytelling, sense of presence. Like if we had rediscovered that being here, you and me today, is all about sense of presence, feeling immersed, connection. So it's like, how can we use technology to go back into what we know makes us human somehow? I think this is an interesting turning point, because it speaks of a need of connection again.
Completely. I mean, just reflecting on, this is the second podcast I've done in person. Most of them are done remotely.
There you
go. One with Orlando Wood and this one. And it is a far more powerful experience generally, just having that conversation. But I do think, I mentioned this before, but I feel like VR is a barrier to that connection. And so like just people don't like putting something on their heads really. And I think it will take some time before the technology catches up really. Once we can put something very light on our heads and still be together and experience those environments, I think that's when it will really be very, very powerful. I mean, I don't know what your opinion is on that.
Yes, I agree. I mean, for sure, 10 years ago when the first headsets came up and they were decently priced, I remember the sort of, that's it, this is a new revolution, this is, drop everything else you've ever done before, you're going to be uber rich.
Yeah.
10 years later, not that many people have bought the headsets, and mainly because why would you want to be alone, isolated in a world where we actually are craving for connection? This being said, I think what we've learned in those 10 years of doing headsets sort of storytelling is now useful to create other type of stories which are more maybe, multi-people in a room. So I think all of this is about creating a language of interaction in space and understanding how we can also play. I think there's one thing with VR that I still find fascinating, and I'm not a fan of VR, just to let you know. So for years, I've been, writing and doing intervention, pretty much, saying, let's remember that our life is about being immersed. So VR has not invented very much. So again, what is it that we can do with VR that goes beyond just the fact of being immersed, which as such, we can also just be immersed in a fantastic story that is an oral story. So for me, that was a, hyperbolic exaggeration of the technology. But there is one thing where I think VR really works well, and it's counterintuitive in a way, because it's about not being yourself. The first one that made me realize this was Notes on Blindness, which is an old project. Yeah. One of the very first VR project that started moving around, coming out from was a companion to a documentary.
Yeah, it was a 1980s documentary, wasn't it? It was quite old.
No. The documentary is, let me remember. I don't remember the date exactly, but it probably is.
Or maybe he recorded his tapes in the 80s?
He recorded to say,
That's
John
right.
Hull, if I remember well, is a man who who lost his sight, but gradually, and in the 80s. And he recorded a sort of diary with a tape, on tapes, very, very exotic, this old medium. And, sort of 30 years later, those tapes were discovered, and they decided to do a whole documentary about this, about himself and losing sight. And also a VR experience was done by Arnaud Collinard, French company again. And so what is interesting about that piece in VR is it doesn't make, if you think about it, doesn't make a lot of sense to use VR, which is mainly a visual, sort of the strength of VR is that you can turn all around, and it feels like if you're in another world, because the system arranges itself so that it feels like the world has moved when I move my head. Yeah. So it is a very viscerally visual medium. And suddenly we're using it to speak about losing sight. So that's already a bit weird. And I thought that and it's a linear story. There's very little interactivity. There are six chapters. But the thing is, because you're in a headset and you're completely inside this other reality, so you're not distracted, you can really reconvene your physical sense of presence within a story. So that's quite powerful. At least for me, it was maybe one of the first time in my life where I thought, oh, what would it be to lose sight? And now you're in a journey where, okay, the images are also a very beautiful and very aesthetic sort of...
they kind of come out of the darkness, don't they?
They come out of the darkness. You have
like
those
flickering
lights.
When you hear the audio.
Sort of, and the audio. So it's a dance between what you're hearing and what you see or not see or are about to see, and the voice of John Hull. And so what it does, and I think for me that's very exciting in VR, is it can give you the opportunity to not be yourself and to perceive what it might be. You never become the other. At no point I become John Hull, that was a creative interpretation of what it might be to not see. But I can spend half an hour in a space where I'm now suddenly more aware that sight is a gift. And also because the story leads me to the end to understand that someone can lose sight and still feel very alive and very connected. I can move through my own fear of losing sight and arrive in a space where, together with the story, I think, oh, yes, it's one sense, but life is everything.
Okay.
It's okay. Yeah. And there are other projects, and I think this is better done in VR because you are quite visually engraved inside the story.
Yeah, it shuts off your other senses.
It shuts
really,
everything
doesn't it?
else.
When you start on Note on Blindness, it's just pitch black. And
yes.
you are and then they start appearing, and that's very powerful.
And I think this connection with the not me or the other is something that VR does very well, even, for example, in connection with nature. So the projects that Marshmallow Laser Feast, which is another UK
It's a great
group, incredible name, yeah. They do the most stunningly beautiful VR projects where, for example, one of their projects is called In the Eyes of the Animal. And you're in a forest. And, I know what a forest looks like as a human. But then I put my headsets and I become a other animal. So I might become, I can't remember, a snake, maybe a bat. And the space that we share is the same. But the space then now looks different and feels different. And I will never be a bat in my life. Maybe in some form of future life. Maybe in
Is that what you're going
life.
For? Reincarnated as a bat?
I don't know about reincarnation. But what I know is that for a glimpse of a second, I thought, wow, we share a world. The world is not mine, is not as I see it, yet back to the same narrative. But being able to see it, to feel it, to embody that otherness, again, I think is a very positive message because people come out of that experience going, oh, we're all connected. They did another project which was called We Are an Ocean of Air. And then you become air. You go through your lungs, you breathe out. So you can see yourself becoming breath. Breath enters into the tree. The tree, sucks, CO2 and becomes. And so you have this sort of fluid journey through life. And life not being me seeing the tree there, but me being connected with that tree through the movement of air and CO2. And so these type of projects, which I think can pretty much only work in VR because I am really diving into the tree. I become air. Like I have this feeling of...
Yeah.
And then I come back to me being a mortal human and I go, I really need to be careful about, the environment.
Yeah.
How can I keep thinking me, them, me, the animals, me, the tree? It must be a we, and I know because I've experienced it. And I think that, is still super powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think getting closer to any way we can get closer to that is really important, isn't? And I think one thing I'd also like to kind of touch on is there's some more like how we can use now. AI is obviously dominating generative AI. We're going to approach it now, but if you think about if I take you back to things like we talked about Papers, Please, that game, or Stanley Parable was another one that came up to my mind, where it narrates your journey as you go, and then the narration changes as you change your actions. Do you think there's a world where generative AI or AI could be used in documentaries or the way we tell a story to start generating things as the user is using it? Do you think that technology we could go that way with AI?
Oh, there's no doubt we could, and there's no doubt that technology can do that. And AI can very easily generate stories, and we could use them use it in so many different environments, and it could be a generative AI, and there's no doubt it can. The doubt is, do we want that? And what I always think about is, you remember when do you have kids? Yeah, I think you told me you have kids.
Yeah.
Very small one.
Yeah, 2 and 4.
Excellent. Best age to understand what I'm about to say. Hence the coffee. I remember when Alexa came out, and people were bribing about the fact that it was amazing because you could call Alexa, which effectively is an AI sort of language recognition system, and ask Alexa to tell a bed story to your kids. I mean, in the era of efficiency, this is amazing. I could put my kids to bed, have Alexa telling them a story, and do my washing up. Yeah. And this, how efficient is this? This is one narrative. Okay, if we want to think about short-term efficiency and doing more and more, AI is going to generate all the stories that we want and is going to help us. But if we start thinking about the consequences of it, I think we start suddenly to find it much less interesting. Because if you do have kids and if you do read them bed stories or invent them, I don't know, what's your situation?
So many. They need, I have to do loads of stories, but both inventing them and then reading them.
Exactly. Then in that case, you will know that the point is not the story you say.
No.
I mean, you can actually tell the same story 1,000 times. They still like it as much as, the first one. So the question is not the story. The beauty of the bedtime story is that first, you're there for them. 1, your time. Second is the pleasure. And we can all remember that pleasure of slowly going to sleep because there's a voice that is reassuring, a story that we kind of know. And it's that pleasure of being loved and being lullabied by love into sleep. And sleeping is scary when you're little because that's black hole. We don't really know if we're coming out of it, yeah? So the whole point of storytelling a kid to sleep is not that much. The stories do count because if you think in accumulation of all the stories you will tell them when they're little, you will have create a sort of worldview of what is dangerous, what is not, what they could do, what they cannot do. So overall, it is important. But the most important thing is that you are there for them and that inventing that story night after night is an act of love. And what they feel is the love. The story is just an instrument for that love. So do we want Alexa to lullaby our kids? I really, really don't want that. And maybe the world is going to go in that direction, but I think it's a world that actually is missing out on a lot of things.
But I think you're right though, because I'm not sure it will, because that's exactly what's lacking with AI content. And I keep saying this to people, is like, when did you last feel the hairs on your neck stand up from anything AI? And I've never had it myself yet.
Well, but then maybe it's not just not good enough yet. But
maybe.
If you think how, the technology has evolved in 3 years, you can imagine that in 5 years more, and probably it can tell all the stories you want.
Sure. But then, like you say about the idea with the kids going to bed, that's the trust element of it, isn't it?
Exactly.
Like it's you need to know that people are there. It's care and trust and attention. Attention is, we can grab attention really easily now, and there's loads of algorithms and things to grab everyone's attention. But if we don't trust what's being said, then what's the point, really?
Totally. And I think it goes deeper than that. It also is that the understanding, that we are a body, we're made by flesh, we live through time, we get old. Time is part of how we process things, and we need to process. If we start to go in a war with AI, thinking that AI is the best because it gains us time, then we end up always being not good enough, not fast enough, and eventually not trusting that the time it takes us to, write an email, write an article, tell a story, understand a book, read the book, supposed to ask AI to give me the summary of the book. It's not lost time, it's process time. And that's what we are. We are animals who needs to process through our body. And if we are not in love with that anymore, if we start to see it as a waste of time, as an inefficiency, as we are kind of going to be doomed because
surplus to requirements, really, isn't it?
Surplus to requirement. So we need to be very careful about, how we use AI. And I think that actually is, quite scary.
Well, look, thank you very much. Yeah.
Pleasure.
And, hopefully we can have you on again in the future at some point.
Thank you for having me.
If this episode sparked something, curiosity, a new way of thinking, or something you're going to take back to the team, we'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. Make sure you're subscribed, leave us a rating, and drop us a comment. Tell us what stuck and what you want us to explore next. We want to know.
This is The Audience Connection, sponsored by Casual, the video partner for global brands trying to build trust with their audiences. We'll see you next time.